Hi everyone, welcome back. Thank you all for coming in for another episode of Lifetime with Katie. Today we're going to follow up on last week's episode. We talked a lot about different pro-choice arguments, arguments for abortion, and we talked about some very surface level stuff. They were very basic arguments. Pro-Life 101. Think of this as Pro-Life 201 or Apologetics, the advanced version, the advanced course. We're going to be talking about some more difficult conversations that come up when you talk about abortion, as well as some tougher arguments. And this week, we're going to focus on what are called the hard cases. And these are very difficult situations where a lot of people, even pro-life people, have trouble with arguing for the life of the preborn child because the situation for the mother is just so difficult. And so we're going to talk about that. And then next week we'll go into what I call the best pro-choice argument out there and how you can respond to it. First, our pro-life fact of the week. Did you know that 4 weeks after conception, a preborn baby's heart beats between 105 and 121 times per minute? Visit ehd.org for more prenatal development facts. Our main focus today are on the hard cases, and these actually come up very frequently in discussions with pro-choice people because they're one of the hardest arguments to answer, and pro-life people usually get these wrong. Unless you are very well trained in apologetics, unless you've been doing it for a long time, very experienced, chances are it's going to be the first few times you have these conversations, you're going to fumble a little bit. And that's because they're uncomfortable, they're difficult, and we're not used to having them. Specifically, we're going to be talking about a few different situations that a person can find themselves in where they are pregnant and they're making a decision of how are they going to handle this, what is going to happen to them and to their baby, and the circumstances around them becoming pregnant are extremely difficult. The first one, which is kind of the most common one that people will bring up as an argument for why abortion should be legal, is rape. And this is a very difficult conversation to have because, there are so many people out there who have, far too many people out there who have been victims, who have been survivors of sexual assault. And so, we have to kind of take a different approach to this than we might to our other kind of theoretical situations or hypotheticals that we might talk about when we're discussing abortion. Because when you're talking to somebody, even if it's completely hypothetical, somebody comes up to you or you're having this conversation about abortion, and they say, well, you wouldn't tell a woman who's been raped that she can't have an abortion. And you might think that this is all hypothetical. You might think, oh, we're doing a thought experiment here. We're not talking about a real case. And so I can speak very bluntly and in a utilitarian way, and it's fine. No, because first of all, part of being pro-life is being compassionate. That's why we're pro-life. It's because we have compassion for the preborn child as well as the mother. So if your attitude is, oh, well, it's a thought experiment, so I don't have to be compassionate, I don't have to be kind about it, maybe we need to rethink. We need to take a step back and rethink how we're approaching this. But also because you do not know who in your conversation or in the vicinity around you has a personal connection with this issue, either with abortion itself or with sexual assault. And the person who you're talking to, you may think this is a hypothetical, but it may be a very real situation that they're referring to and that they're dressing up as a hypothetical because they don't, especially if you're a stranger, they don't want to share this with you. They don't want to talk to you about the details of something that happened to them. So it may very well be a real situation, and that's why we can never assume. We have to always approach as though you are talking to somebody who's been through this situation. Just assume that the person in front of you, they have some personal connection. It is personal to them. And if you start out assuming that, you're going to have a much better conversation. Whenever any of these hard cases come up, especially anything having to do with rape or sexual assault, our first reaction before we talk about anything else has to be compassion. It has to be support for the woman who has survived this. And Obviously, when I'm saying women, because we're talking about pregnancy and abortion in this case. Obviously, if we're talking about sexual assault in a broader sense, then obviously we'd be talking about men too. But we're talking right now in the case of abortion and sexual assault, and so we're primarily talking about the woman. But we have to approach this with compassion, with love for that woman, whether she's hypothetical or real. It doesn't matter. We have to approach it from this very serious and compassionate stance. We can't make jokes. Do not make jokes in these kinds of conversations. They're not funny. They're not funny ever, but they're especially not funny in these conversations. Don't try to make this lighthearted. Don't try to make this a casual debate. It's not. As soon as the issue of rape is brought into this, we're in a different frame of mind, and we have to remember that. So coming from this compassionate mind frame or frame of mind, really what that means is that our first concern, if somebody's telling us, oh, this woman was raped and she became pregnant, our first concern is she okay? Is the woman okay? Is she safe? How long ago did this happen? Has she been to a doctor? Have the police been involved? Is the rapist behind bars? Those kind of initial questions. And even if we're talking about hypothetical, still ask those questions, or at least phrase it this way. My first concern in a situation like that is making sure that the woman is safe, making sure that the rapist is behind bars, making sure that the woman has access to counseling and support, trauma counseling specifically. You do not just get over something like that. That doesn't just go away. And especially, in this case, we're talking about something that she may never forget for the rest of her life. She may be able to recover to a certain extent, where she, is able to heal and kind of, move on with her life, but she's never going to forget. It's always going to be in the back of her mind. It's always going to be part of her life experience. That's going to always be changed now that has happened to her. So we have to be mindful of that. It's not something that just goes away or she gets over. Then the next question, once we've established that she is safe, she is healthy, she is going to be okay, then we're going to talk about, abortion as a second trauma. So you can look up the stories of countless women who have been through abortions and have come out the other side with a lot of regret and a lot of trauma. Now, this doesn't happen to everybody, and everybody responds to this kind of situation differently, but there are so many women who have reported trauma after an abortion, especially when, abortion is a very invasive thing, especially in the surgical abortions. It's very invasive, and it's invasive in a way that in some cases can bring that woman back to that initial trauma. And so even just from that, even if we're not, setting aside for a second the preborn child, we'll get back to the preborn child, I promise. But setting them aside for a second and focusing on what is best for this woman right now, a second trauma that is in some ways very reminiscent of the first one may not be what's best for her. Now, bringing back the preborn child, the human being, we have to also understand that this is an innocent human being, that child does not bear any responsibility for the person who committed the crime, or for the crime that was committed. There's a criminal, there's a rapist. Hopefully he is behind bars. Hopefully he's been arrested. Hopefully he's being put on trial. But he committed the crime. The woman obviously didn't commit the crime in this scenario. Obviously she is innocent, and so is the child. You can actually find a lot of stories if you go to Save the One, and I'll put the link in the description, but Save the One has a lot of stories of women who have chosen life after rape, and also people who were conceived in rape and now have rich, fulfilling lives. And that brings me kind of to my third point here, is that when we talk about the child who's been conceived in rape, unfortunately, I have heard a lot of people refer to them as a rape baby or the rapist's baby. I've even heard people refer to them as demon spawn or all kinds of other horrible things, horrible names that people will call that child. What we have to remember is that is a child. That is a human being. Regardless of what happened prior to that child's conception, that's still a child. This is a human being, a human child, who is innocent, who has done nothing wrong, who has no responsibility for what happened prior to them being conceived. And that's what, again, we have to remember this. The conception would come after, okay, after the crime itself was committed. So this child didn't even exist when that crime was committed, so we cannot hold them responsible. So when we are talking about this woman who has been through this trauma and now she's pregnant, and now she's making this decision, we have to understand that there are two human beings involved that we are talking about. There are two lives, and we want to respect and love and protect both of them. We want the woman to receive the counseling and support that she needs, and we want the child to be well nourished, healthy, have a healthy delivery, and a healthy upbringing. That's what we want. Now, this can look a few different ways. This can turn out a few different ways. There are many women who have conceived in rape and have chosen to not only bring their child to term, but also to raise their child. And there are many who have found actually empowerment in that, because they recognize that, we keep calling that child the rapist baby, but in reality, it is more so, in this case, the woman's baby. It's more her baby than it is his. She is the parent. She is acting as a parent to that child, whereas the rapist is not. And so, if we're going to say whose child this is, it's going to be the mother's in this case. So I think that's really important to distinguish as well, is that this does not have to be a negative experience for the mother. Many people say, oh, well, the pregnancy or the baby is going to remind her of the rapist. She doesn't need a reminder. She will remember. It's never going to completely go away. But this child can be a symbol of hope. This child can be the silver lining. Okay? This child is not the rapist. And the child's not going to grow up to be a rapist. There is absolutely zero evidence to suggest that a child conceived in rape is more likely to grow up to, be any different from any other child. You wouldn't know simply by looking at them, simply by meeting somebody. You wouldn't know if they were conceived in rape or not. There is no indication. The crimes of the parents do not impact the life and the decisions of that child as they grow up. So we do have to kind of keep that in mind. And we want to emphasize that these are two human beings, two lives, two people. And we do not sacrifice one when we can save and love and care for both. And this is something that for some reason is very, very difficult when you're talking to pro-choice people. They always want you to choose between the mother and the child. And this is where we're going to emphasize that we do not choose between the mother and the child. We choose both. We choose to love them both. They are both human. They are both important. They both have rights. And we're loving them both. And that means that killing one of them is not an option. That's not going to be something that we're going to consider. Another common issue is the life or health of the mother. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of medical detail here because I am not a doctor. I have not been to medical school. However, there are some amazing experts who have given their medical expert opinions in this matter. And so I'm going to link in the description to a video by Dr. Anthony Levatino. He is a former abortionist. He is now pro-life. He is very, very familiar with what abortion does, how abortion works, because he's done it many, many times. And so he has a series of videos actually that do a very great job of giving kind of more detail, more medically accurate detail about how abortion works. And also he goes into some detail about abortion in the case of where the mother's life or health is at risk. And again, he has some unique experience, not only because he is was a former abortionist, but also because at the same time that he was doing abortions, he was also practicing OBGYN, seeing some high risk pregnancy patients. And so he saw side by side, in one case, a woman who was choosing abortion and he's doing everything he can to end that child's life. And in the other case, a woman who has a pregnancy complication and he's doing everything he can to save both the mother's life and the child's. And so he really does a good job of explaining that balance and how, in his experience and in all medical literature, and I mean just across the board, there is no reason to abort a child, to actively kill a child in the womb in order to save the life of the mother. Now, there are some cases where early delivery is necessary, but we're going to distinguish that from abortion because early delivery is not the intentional killing of the child. We're actually getting better and better and better at protecting and saving premature babies. And so we can deliver early, or doctors can deliver early and still save the child and save the mother. I have not yet seen a legitimate reason to abort a child. Now, delivering early, yes, absolutely. Delivering via C-section, yes, plenty of times. Dismembering, poisoning, suffocating a child in the womb, not so much. So that's the distinction we want to draw there, is that we are not sacrificing the mother. We are also not sacrificing the child. We are attempting to save both. And in medicine, that is always the goal, is to save as many lives as possible. And if we approach every case from that perspective, as we want to save as many lives as possible, it makes all those decisions a lot easier. So when we come up to life or health of the mother, that's the direction we want to go, save as many lives as possible. Also, if the mother's life or health is at risk, she's not going to an abortion facility. She's going to a hospital. And that's another thing we need to emphasize, is that legalized abortion is not necessary for those cases, even if abortion was necessary to save those lives. She would go to a hospital and receive appropriate medical care in that hospital. Currently in America, there is no law that would prevent doctors from saving the mother's life in those kinds of cases. There's a lot of myths out there, and people say, oh, if you go to a Catholic hospital, they won't. If you go to a Catholic hospital, they shouldn't be doing abortions, but if the mother's life is at risk, they can intervene in a way that is medically appropriate and necessary to save as many lives as possible. That is something they can do. So it is a myth that they are prevented from intervening in those cases. Also, another one that comes up is with miscarriages. There are some people who say that banning abortion would prevent doctors from being able to treat a woman who is miscarrying and where the baby is still inside her womb. That is also not the case. If the child has already died, there is nothing ethically to prevent that doctor from removing the child. So it's very important that we get those facts clear and that we understand exactly what we're talking about. And that goes back to the first video. We're talking about asking clarifying questions, listening to the person, understanding exactly what they're saying, so that you're not misunderstanding them and then you're both talking at each other and not hearing each other. So understanding what the person is actually saying is very important in these cases so that we can be very clear in our language. The third kind of case that we're going to talk about, so we've talked about rape and sexual assault, and we've talked about the life and health of the mother. And our third case that we're going to go into is one that really combines both. And that is the very sad, the very difficult case where a young girl, a child really, is herself sexually assaulted by somebody, whether it's a stranger, whether it's a family member, whatever the case may be, and she becomes pregnant. Nationally, especially in America, girls are hitting puberty at earlier and earlier ages. And what that means is that they are able to get pregnant at earlier and earlier ages. And so I would not be surprised. I would be very saddened, but I would not be surprised if we begin to see more of those cases. Right now, those cases are very few, but they do occur, and unfortunately, we may see more of them in the future because the average age of puberty is moving to the younger side. In these cases where it is a child herself who has now become pregnant with a preborn child, again, we have to remember that we have two human lives, and we have to remember that our first and only response is love and compassion for both lives. Just like with at the beginning when I talked about responding with compassion and love and support to somebody who's been a victim of sexual assault, we want to do the same thing with this child. We want to make sure that she is safe. Safety first. Okay. If this situation comes up, hypothetical or real, our first question is she safe? Is she away from the person who hurt her? Especially if it was a family member. Has she been taken out of that home, out of that environment, so that she is no longer at risk of being victimized? Unfortunately, as well, there have been many cases and women who have come out and said that as children, their abuser took them to places like Planned Parenthood to have an abortion to get rid of the evidence, in this case, the preborn child. So when we talk about abortion in these cases, oftentimes it's actually being used to get rid of evidence and to prevent the abuser from being prosecuted and imprisoned. And so we want to make sure that she is safe. We want to make sure that the person who hurt her is behind bars, or going to be very soon. We want to make sure that he has no access to hurting her again. And so that's our first and primary goal. Then, when that has been taken care of and she is receiving support, counseling, everything that is appropriate for somebody who has been through something that traumatic at that age, then we talk about the pregnancy. And this, again, is very difficult. It really combines the other two things that we talked about today. Because there is a life and health risk in many cases, because she is so young and her body is not equipped to handle this. Just because she's hit puberty, just because she is capable of getting pregnant, does not mean that she is at a good place in life to be having that child, physically, emotionally, socially, any of that. So we do need to acknowledge that it will be an extremely difficult situation. This is not an easy, this isn't just like, oh, well, we know the answer to this. No, it's going to be a difficult situation. It's going to be stressful. It's going to be, it's going to have to be taken one step at a time. There's no one blanket answer to every situation. But what we do know is that we have two human beings, two children. Okay? They're both children. They're both innocent, vulnerable, helpless children. Neither of them deserve what has happened to them. Neither of them are at fault. Both of them have been dealt a hand that is not, that is not fair. It's not fair to them. And yet that's what's happened, and that's where we have to go from there. And so both of them, both children, need our love, care, and support. And so that needs to be our focus. And just like I said with if you go see Dr. Anthony Levatina's video on, cases where the life or health of the mother is at risk, what we understand, medically speaking, is that while it's certainly not an ideal situation for the child, there are a lot of things that doctors can do to keep her safe throughout the process of pregnancy and either delivery or an early C-section, something like that. And again, none of this is ideal. We wish that none of this had ever happened in the first place. But now we have two children, and we have two children that need support and care and love. So when we reach these scenarios, whether they're hypothetical or real, we want to approach them with that attitude of love and care and support. So I hope this was helpful for you. If you have further questions about anything I said here, or you want some clarification on any of the points that I made, or if somebody has brought to you an argument that you didn't know what to do with, and it doesn't quite fit into what I've addressed here today, please click the link in the description below. Send me that question. I can try to answer it in a future video. And we can, I want to be able to get to those questions for you guys. We do have a question for today's video. This is from Kelsey, and I'm going to read it real quick here so I get it right. Kelsey says, you mentioned that you do sidewalk advocacy. How is that different from protesting or from the stereotype of pro-lifers harassing women on their way into an abortion clinic? That's a great question. And so this is a really common misconception when it comes to sidewalk advocacy, and we will go into more detail on that in a future video. But I just do want to address really quickly, because I've gotten this a lot from friends and family members who are pro-life, but don't understand what sidewalk advocacy is. And they are picturing the stereotype that you've seen. You've probably seen it in a movie somewhere, where it's all these protesters outside an abortion clinic, and they're holding signs and they're shouting at the woman. And that is not at all what sidewalk advocacy actually looks like. And maybe someday down the road I'll do like a video on location out at an abortion facility, just so you can see what this looks like. But what you have to understand with sidewalk advocacy is that it is not, it's not a protest. It's not a political event. It's not activism in that sense. What it is it's standing out there where that woman is about to go into that abortion facility. And what you want to do is you want to talk to her and understand, where is she coming from? What are her needs? What is driving her to this place? So it's a lot of listening. Just like, we talked about, when you're having a conversation with a pro-choice person, you always want to listen. It's the same thing in sidewalk advocacy. Your first job is to listen, and to let her tell her story. Not to judge her, and not to say, oh, well, you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done that, or, oh, just do this. That's not how this works. It's listening, understanding where she's coming from, understanding what the obstacles are for her to choose life, what is in her way, and then helping her remove those obstacles, so that she can choose life for her child. With that, we are about at the end of our episode for today. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I hope it was useful and helpful for you. So please leave comments, hit like, hit subscribe, and be ready for next week's episode, where we will go into some of the best pro-choice arguments that are out there. Thank you very much, and hope to see you again on Lifetime with Katie.